Club for The Last Secret. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Before we do anything, I just wanted to introduce you to my little boy Rupert here. I was on mat leave for a year, and I was expressly told that I had to, had to show him on the meeting tonight. And so this is why I was away. And now he's going to go to bed because he's a squirmy wormy. Can you say bye bye? Bye bye. Okay.
He's so cute.
My name is Erin Lebar. I am your book club administrator for the Free Press. I'll do a quick round of introductions. Tonight, as host, we have Ariel Gordon, our copy editor at the Free Press and author, of course. We have Chris Hall from McNally Robinson, and our author of the evening, Maia Caron. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we continue, I just want to acknowledge that the Free Press and McNally Robinson are located on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Dakota people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And Maya is joining us from Nanaimo, BC, which is the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Did I do okay with the pronunciation there? Okay. The meeting will progress as it always does. I'm going to throw to Chris to do a brief introduction, and then Maya is going to do a reading, and Ariel will kick off the Q&A with the questions that all of you submitted. We got actually quite a few questions this time, so it's really great to see. And with that, I will throw it over to Chris.
Thank you, Erin. Good evening, everybody. Tonight we talk about Savka and Jeannie, travel back to Ukraine in 1944 and Salt Spring Island in 1972. At first, the two women seem so far apart in space and time, and yet by the end of the novel, their stories have come together. That journey is full of feats of survival and desperate acts, deceptions and betrayals, as well as the powerful bonds of love. I found the story of Savka and her family particularly fascinating, caught as they are between the German and Russian armies, and no good side to choose from. Theirs is a world with little room for trust and loyalty, but then maybe Jeannie's world is not so different. So I can't wait to talk about these worlds with the author, Maia Caron, but before we do, Maia is going to open with a short reading.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm going to read from Savka's first chapter. So it's in Dermnitsa Reichskommissariat, Ukraine, which was German-occupied Ukraine, and February 25th, 1944. The mud beneath Savka Ivanets's knees vibrated with the shell strikes of Nazi and Soviet artillery and the buzz of Russian planes strafing Wehrmacht troops at the front lines, only 5 kilometers to the east. She knelt at the river's edge, so close to her mother and her sister Lilia, their foreheads almost touched. Nazis still held this part of Ukraine, but the Red Army was grinding closer every day. "If I eat another stinking chestnut root, I'll die," Lilia said, glancing over her shoulder at the forest that carpeted the mountain behind their village. "I'm going to the woods," she threatened. "Early shovel will be sprouting under the trees." "You're not going anywhere," Savka said. She exchanged a look with her mother, whose weary eyes flicked between her 2 daughters, Mama, who trembled at the first sign of discord, and whose layers of tattered clothing broke Savka's heart. Warming temperatures had melted most of the winter snow, leaving half-frozen puddles and turning mud on the banks of the river into a kind of quicksand that sucked at their knees. This ground had been fought over for centuries by Vikings and Russian empresses, Polish princes and Mongol khans, and now it was threatened by another, perhaps more formidable foe. "The forest is a guerrilla war zone," Savka warned Lilia. "Do you want your throat slit by a Soviet partisan?" The words were torn from her mouth by the blast of 3 Messerschmitts roaring overhead on their way to the front. Savka's nostrils filled with a primeval smell of frigid river water and water chestnut plants that had died off with the coming of winter. Wind scoured the damp skin of her cheeks, and the spectral sun was dimmed suddenly by a thunderhead rolling down the slopes of the mountain, sending shadows across the river. Though she didn't know it, the war would soon sweep Savka up and carry her down a river like this one. She did not yet know there were deeper levels of despair than fearing her husband was dead and searching vainly for food with a stomach empty as a gourd. She looked up at Lilia, who was impatiently waiting for her to take the bait. Was it possible to stop a rebellious sister from getting herself killed? If it is danger you seek, you'll soon get it when the Russians come, she said through gritted teeth. They'll rape and murder every Nazi collaborator. Mama's hand flew to her mouth, and Savka immediately regretted her words. Lilia threw down the stick she'd been using to dig out chestnut tubers. So advises my dear older sister, wife of a Waffen SS officer, still carrying the medic bag she stole from the back of a Nazi ambulance. I'd rather take my chances with partisans than spend more time with you. And that is the beginning of the Savka story.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Ariel, I'll pass it over to you to start the Q&A.
Well, I have some questions. There are questions from the club members, but I wanted to start us off with a question from the discussion guide at the back of your book, because I feel bad for the people that came up with these questions. They need to be used.
I know no one really who answers them. I guess in quiet little book clubs all over the country, but
well, I wondered if you'd been going into book clubs and hearing people talk along on these things or not.
They usually have different questions, like different questions. I've never had to answer a question that came from the reading guide, though I really like those questions. So
I knew that somehow. Okay, are we ready?
Yeah.
Number 1. The last secret is largely told from Savka and Jeannie's perspectives. How do their alternating points of view enrich the narrative?
Well, I know people have said on Goodreads or whatever that they feel that those are very different timelines, and how do they come together? Like they're wondering, like these two women have such different experiences, but I feel that they had a very similar. They're almost bonded by embodied experience of women. They're both kind of caught in prisons, not of their own making, right? So those two narratives kind of meld together. And I hope, I've found that people really do wonder how do they come together? How are they actually going to make these two people come together? And I wasn't even sure when I started writing how I would bring them together. I knew there was that central mystery, and I wanted them to be linked by that. And you don't really get to know what that is until later in the book, about what happened that night in the hospital, and that they both experienced in a different way. So I don't know, does that answer your question about?
And you talk in your afterword a little bit about what compelled you towards the Fire Bride, right? That there was a real life example that your mother had experienced.
Yeah.
And it's funny how those kinds of things can stick in the writer's brain. So I appreciate it when a writer digs out an obsession, right? Where they take something that's been with them for a long time and they put it in a book. I always like that. Now, my next question is going to be slightly more general. So, what do historical novels do that novels set in contemporary times don't? For instance, so what is their burden as a writer of historical novels, and what is their delicious edge?
Well, I think that they really, like, women who were in the past, like in World War II specifically, I think there's so many more stories coming out of there. Like, we just don't know what all these women were doing. And some of them were spies, some were collaborators. They were having to really deal with a world without men around, but the war was everywhere, on the Eastern Front especially. So I find it so fascinating. Like when I found Savka, those Ukrainian medics, I read those articles that other Ukrainian women had written about them, and they had so much passion for those women, and they brought them out of the historical record, sort of, which was really not. They just didn't really exist. And so when I read about them, I just wanted to bring her, like I made a composite character in Savka of those women, because then I didn't even know, I started writing in 2019, so I didn't know that Ukraine was going to be invaded again by Russia. So I just thought I was just writing about Ukraine and Jeannie. And I think that reading about those women or any woman from history, it's like it makes history so accessible. It shows that women had the same issues and worries and concerns and dark secrets that we do too. And like I do think it's like connects us all on that level. Like the women, they were voiceless, nameless of history, but here they are right here. I can access that. So I think that's what gives historical fiction an edge. The real people that you're reading about.
And your bio says basically that your job as a writer is to research and write women's untold stories of the past. How did you come to that particular focus as a novelist?
Well, even in Song of Batoche, I was very interested in the women's focus, because the history books don't really talk about women, like what women were thinking, and of course, women were very much involved. Men thought they were in control, but women often were background, whispering and talking about, or just, men relied on women a lot to give them guidance, direction. And, I would think that women are really very powerful, even in their own ways. I remember reading something, it was like they had a resistance of the mind because they couldn't maybe resist outwardly, right? So I'm just fascinated by women and how they always found a way to really find love even in the middle of a war, and how they had so much resilience.
Well, and you talk about finding these characters and creating these composites of characters and pulling different real and fictional and but one of the questions from the club members was, which character in your book did you enjoy developing and writing about the most? And conversely, which one did you least like writing about and why?
I guess I didn't love Belyakov. He was built after Nikolai Yetsov, who was just like a little psychopath. He was Stalin's best friend, so that should tell you everything. And he kind of came up through the KGB, through the NKVD ranks, just like Putin did. So he was, I didn't really love writing about him, but he only had one point of view in the book. I guess the person I really loved writing about was Jeannie, because I'd heard so much about her. I mean, she's inspired by a real woman, which I changed all of the, her name, the circumstances of her injuries. I'd grown up hearing about her, so I really connected to her the most. So yeah, I really loved writing about her. She was an interesting character.
It's interesting though, because we love to hate villains, and he is particularly villainous. I mean, he follows this family for what, 20 years, 25 years? He's the worst. I'm going to say it. He is the worst.
I know, but that was what happened in the Cold War. And that Rimini list was very important to the Soviets. So when I read that the Rimini list had been classified by the British in just after the war, because they knew that the Soviets really wanted every one of those men in that division. They got about 350 of them before the British really cottoned on to what was happening and started protecting them. But yeah, it was just to read about how much the Soviets wanted those guys. So they really did follow, where in the Cold War, they really did steal Finnish identities while they were occupying Finland. And they used those identities, and they were in the States and in Canada and Britain and wherever they knew that the Ukrainians were the underground resistance guys, and the SF who had been in the 14th Division were working with MI6 and with CIA. So they followed them.
Did you enjoy the end of Belyakov's story? Because you have him almost shrivel up and disappear. And then he says to the police officer, "I'm a very important person, just ask Stalin." And the police officer says Stalin's dead.
I know. Well, I did write a little, I did for my own, edification. I did give it to my editor. She didn't, I don't know if she actually saw it. She didn't say anything about it. But yeah, I had an epilogue of him in Black Eagle prison, because that's an actual prison. That's a really, where all the worst Russian criminals go. So you can imagine what it's like in there. And he was there. And it was very satisfying to write that, but it didn't end up in the book.
And the real life character wasn't assigned to get the Rimini list. That was an invention of yours.
Yeah, that's what he was actually executed by Stalin in 1939. He was a bad boy, did all kinds of things, even for Stalin. And so Stalin got rid of him. But you couldn't, even other NKVD leaders too were always getting taken out by Stalin. He just got rid of his own people so much. But yeah, no, he was quite a character. And yeah, I just thought, well, if he had lived and wasn't executed, then he would have probably been after the Rimini list.
I have another question from the readers from the book club who say, who was Savka really protecting when she burned the Rimini list? I have my own opinions about this, but I want to hear yours.
Interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. Huh. Well, I guess she was protecting all those men who, it was so nuanced during the war. Like here you are, a Soviet Ukraine, and you hate the Soviets, right? You hate what's coming from Moscow. You hate the NKVD. So they took the chance when the Germans came to think, well, we're going to have our sovereignty. So let's join the Waffen SS. And so a lot of them did. And they fought against, the Russians. And that's why the Russians wanted them. They wanted to punish them and kill them afterwards. So yeah, I mean, I've forgotten the question again.
Who was she really protecting?
Oh yeah, so I think she at one point she does say, well, I actually have to go against Ukraine by being a doubles agent kind of thing, by being a spy for Belyakov. And my husband is the one who's protecting them, these men. So I think she was just saying, well, you know what? It doesn't really need to be in the world. What am I going to do? What's she going to do with it? Belyakov is gone. So I don't know what she would have done with it otherwise. But, the real Rimini list was only declassified in 2017. So the British did keep their pledge to protect those men, even though in Yalta, they were told everyone has to give their prisoners of war up. That's why the Soviets thought that they should be getting those men to punish them, right?
Did you know that the Ukraine situation, because I have to admit I oversimplified the Eastern Front and the Western Front. I'd never thought of the Ukrainians getting so caught in between, and how it's perfectly rational for them to have sided with Germany to fight their enemy. Did you know this, or did this discovery happen in your research?
I did a lot of research. I was doing, trying to find when I'm writing, I want to find real plot points from history. So, but I was not aware of how complex Ukrainian history was, culture, and that changed hands so many times. It was Austro-Hungarian. It was, at one time it was Kievan Rus, which was their own, lands. And then Poland and Austria-Hungary and Russia. And so it was changing hands so much. And it became the Eastern Front. Like, they didn't even call it the Eastern Front because the Western Front hadn't really been established by then. But, they called it the Front, the Ukrainian Front. And it really was pushed back and forth. And then in 1944, when that opens, when the story opens, the Soviet, the Red Army is really pushing the Germans back towards Berlin. And that was a solid push that never went the other way after that.
I think there was also that Mennonites had some of that same experience too, right?
What was that? Sorry, Ariel?
Oh, I was saying that I think some Mennonites, some of which wound up in Manitoba, had that experience too, that they were trapped between the Germans and the Russians. And oftentimes when they were captured, the Germans would be like, you speak German, you're German, join or die, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I'm
it was
not a
very.
fan of that. Don't come for me, Mennonites.
I know. I was lucky. I had a Ukrainian expert reader as I was writing and her parents and grandparents had been brought up in the same area of Ukraine. And so she read the manuscript a few times and, she was giving me a lot of insight into that. Otherwise, it was just really research. And I had never been to Ukraine. I'd never been to Krakow, which actually one of the woman who voiced Savka in the audiobook, she said, when were you in Krakow? Because I've been there so many times. I said, I've never been there. She said, how the hell did you know? Like, I thought you would live there or something. I'm like,
Well, I was going to ask you about more of your research because I know that from experience that historical novels everybody's fascinated about the research. So, like, did you just read, or did you travel, or like, what were your methods?
Well, I started writing and researching in 2019, the end of 2019, and I was just writing through, and of course, it didn't look like this book at all at first. It was Jeannie and Taras or Danik, and I didn't have Savka's point of view in it at all. So it changed when it was bought by Doubleday, and she wanted more, Savka and Danik and Taras and Marco. But my research really was all over the place. Researching the very last minute, you're still researching because my copy editor was like, oh, that's not a pistol, it's a revolver. And I had to learn so much about weaponry. Like, my editor kept saying, okay, we need to know what kind of gun that is. Because they were stealing a lot of guns from the Soviet partisans, the underground. So I had to figure out what guns the Soviets had, and just a lot of the political, the cultural, it's just immersing myself in it so that I could put it on the page, but yet try not to make it sound like a history lesson too. So, it's always, a very fine balance. And then when all those editors are looking at it at the end, like the really fact checking, it's like, oh, okay, I guess I better just more, I have to know that Korovin pistol, the sound it made when it was. So that's why I might be on the NSA watch list, because I'm putting in Korovin pistol, firing, field stripping a Walther or a Luger. And what does it sound like? I'm sure that, those little words into Google really didn't do me any favors. So I'm pretty sure that most people who write about World War II, they're on the NSA watch list just for that, or the Pasha machine guns and stuff like that. And just a lot you have to look at and really get in your head so that you feel like you're there,
Mhm.
I guess because the pandemic happened, as you were working on this book, you couldn't have done the research travel in the same way that you might have if you'd had.
Yeah, COVID happened, yeah.
Druthers.
Pardon?
If you'd had your druthers, you might have traveled.
Yeah, no, I was hoping to be able to go, because it was hard for me. I know Vancouver, I know Salt Spring, and it was easy enough, though I did end up going there just to staying in a house that was on the north of the island, just to get a sense of it again. But yeah, it was hard with the Carpathians. Really had to look at Google Earth a lot and images. Yeah, just images, just trying to really understand what it was like to walk up through on the mountain, the Carpathians, and look down. So it's that kind of research isn't very glamorous, but it's easier probably to write about Krakow because there's lots more, landmarks and that kind of thing.
So I'm curious what you thought of what they call the Yaroslav Hunka scandal from September 2023, when a Ukrainian Canadian who was a member of the Waffen SS was brought to the House of Commons and got the 2 standing ovations. And then they were like, yes, he fought the Soviets. And I know we're in a war against Russia, or Russia's being aggressive against, has aggressed into Ukraine. But, that meant that he fought for the Nazis. So, like, that was a whole moment that was so interesting in the like, if you think about everything that's happening in your novel, right? Like, what would happen if one of those people was in Canada? And you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Well, I did talk about that a bit. I hinted at what, the Poles and the Ukrainians had there's still a lot of bad blood between them. And there's still a lot of, like, historically, a lot of infighting because the borders changed so much, and one side atrocities, the other side atrocities. So when those men actually got into the Waffen SS, unfortunately, the SS and Himmler, they thought of Poles just below Jews, right? So any Pole was up for grabs. Like, I think it was Huta Piniaka, which was of an actual little village where the partisans had hung out, and they were hoping that no one would know, would keep them. They wouldn't know when to attack them because it was obviously people were there, like real people. They weren't just partisans. So I think they went in there and they just completely cleared that village. That's why I said he remembers the command from the Germans, clear the village, because or clean the village. It was first clear the village, and we decided, no, it's going to be clean the village, clean the village because it really did happen that way. And so there were atrocities, but there were atrocities on both sides. And this was war. There is nuance. Like, they did what they were supposed to do. They were told to do it by the Germans. Perhaps they had some animosity in their hearts too towards the Poles. So that's, I kind of skirted around that because I know it's very nuanced. Everyone has choices. Some women became collaborators just to get food for their children, or so, I don't like to judge any choices that were made during wartime.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is that particular political scandal was so interesting. You must have been watching that, having done all this research, having known so much about that situation, and then to see it on the national stage, having a discussion about Ukrainian people in the Waffen SS, and right in the context of the current war.
Yeah, I've read a lot about the Waffen SS, and there are a lot of people really proud of being, having their father or their grandfather in the Waffen SS, because they were fighting the Red Army. That was their main thing, and partisans. They were making sure the partisans didn't blow up the bridges and the supply lines for the Germans. So, yeah, it was a lot of nuance there, and I did when that was happening, I thought, okay, it's coming out, so yeah, people should be questioning it, right? Of course.
Yeah.
So there's a couple questions in the live chat, if you don't mind me interrupting here. One of them is, what happened to Savka's family back home, so back in Ukraine, and also what happened to Jeannie's husband, Michael?
Oh yeah, someone asked me in that book club, they said, but what about Michael? How did that really happen? And he just dumped her, he couldn't take having damaged goods, right? So that was it for that. And she was badly burned. So, he took off. What happened to
Savka, like her mom and her sister, do you
yes.
think that they died, or do you think that they survived?
I presumed that they had died because they would have found a way to her. And, we talked about that. Should they find a way to her? And I thought about it a lot, but I thought, no, it's more, so many people perished. especially when the Soviet army was coming through. If you were like, they had spies in each village, so they would go to that spy and ask them who was really not on our side. So then they would punish those people. So they would be sent to the gulag, um, and they would just disappear there. They would die there. So that's what, in my mind, happened. That so many people, it happened to so many people. So in my mind, that was what happened.
And then there's one more from the chat that kind of ties into a reader question. And you mentioned this earlier that you started with Jeannie's story. So one of the questions was, which story did you start with first? So that answers that. And then this one says, where did you get your inspiration when your editor asked you to expand the story regarding Jeannie?
Expand the story. Was that in my author's note? Trying to remember.
No,
Expand.
like you had said that. Oh, no, I think this question might be the opposite, because the author or the editor asked you to expand Savka's story. So maybe
Yes.
go with that instead.
And the question is,
Where did
how
you
did
get
I?
your inspiration when your editor asked you to expand Savka's story?
Well, it was during a Zoom call, an edit call, and we were talking about her notes. And she said, how come she's so quiet? I'd like her to stand up for herself more. And I said, well, she's been traumatized. And so she's had, abuse of, experiences. So I thought that she wouldn't really be able to speak up for herself. And she said, well, this is a story, you can't have a silent character. So, she said, can we bring this forward? And she said, did you have something like that happen to you? And I had never talked to anybody about it except for therapists and my best friends. But I found myself saying, yes, I did. And she goes, okay, you're gonna give her a voice. And I found that was very therapeutic for me to do that and realize, oh yeah, I didn't realize I was writing about my own issues, my own experiences, really. And it was kind of like an eye opener. And I just decided, okay, I'm gonna give her a voice. And that's, sort of me giving myself a voice too.
Could I ask you about Ava? I found Ava to be, well, like when you were just talking earlier about just putting food on the table and trying to get your kids through to surviving and things, because that time in Krakow for Savka is such a respite, and she learns to trust Ava so much, and then it's like devastating when she's betrayed, but at the same time, Ava, it's so believable that Ava would do that. So can you tell us about Ava a little bit more? Am I even pronouncing that right?
Yes, Ava. Yeah. A lot of people really like Eva. Like they want a book about her or something. Like
Mhm.
I guess because she was so gutsy and
Tough, yeah.
if she had her child stolen from her, so
Mhm.
the Soviets used that to their benefit and said, if you can get this person, because they weren't in Krakow yet. They were just coming in at that time in January, and that was the day of the elections, the supposed democratic elections in Poland. So yeah, she was a member of the resistance, of the Polish resistance. I knew I wanted to write a character who was in the Polish resistance because it was such a powerful resistance, and women were a big part of it. And yeah, I was sad that she had to be, to betray Savka, but it was just another thing that Savka, okay, had your respite, but you know what? This is back to that harsh reality that Taras is still being held. And so, she didn't have to make that choice, really, like that she wasn't given that, even though Belyakov, kind of dangled in front of her. If you do this, if you get the Rimini list, you get him back. So she could never find the Rimini list, so that just didn't happen for her. But he came back anyway, Taras, which did everybody know, like that he was him, that Danik was Taras? Some people were like, "Oh, we didn't know that until it
I figured it
happened."
out just before the door opened, maybe, but
Oh, really? Oh,
I
okay.
think so, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, my copy editor was like, "What? I didn't even see that coming." I'm like, "Really?" My copy editor was Jill Adamson of Outlander and Ridge Runner. That she does some copy editing, and I was like, I was so amazed that she didn't get. So I just kind of thought, okay, I'll just maybe try to make him his identity a little more.
Well, I thought at first he was Marco. So I was on my guard right off the bat as to who is this guy. So, it wasn't Marco, but so who else could it be?
Yeah, yeah, it got to be someone. I tried to, make him a Czech journalist, maybe make Marco, have a thing at the Czech border, and that actually happened. They were sent by MI6 into Ukraine to bolster support for the Ukrainian underground against the Soviets during the Cold War. So those things really did happen.
What was it like writing what are in essence happy endings for all these very, you know, people that had suffered so much? Like all of them had suffered so much, and you, in some ways, you wrote, like you put them in good places at the end, like you left them in good places. Was that satisfying as a novelist?
Yeah, no, I do like a happy ending. I knew that I wanted to, that was where I was going to go, that, that Savka and Taras would be reunited, and that Savka and Jeannie would find connection on Salt Spring, and that make it a home, because, neither of them had a home. So I really did want that to come full circle and to give her a child, and just to, because both of them had their lives stolen from them, really. So I really wanted to give that back to them. It was fun. It was fun to do that. Yeah.
Um, so I need you. There's a question that we have from the readers, and they want to know from the book club members. They want to know: has any publisher come forward to translate this book into Ukrainian or German or Polish?
Well, that would mean my agent keeps telling me that historical novels are tough to sell in Europe. Yeah, they want more contemporary novels. So not a lot of historical fiction sells in Europe. And yeah, I would love it in Ukraine, but I don't know what they've decided not to, or Poland. Apparently, if Poland buys it, everyone kind of clamors to buy it. Yeah, no, it hasn't been yet, but who knows? I mean, I thought maybe when it got on the bestseller list, it would, but we'll see what happens with it. It's in 4 months that, that's been published, so it would be great to see some um, some foreign translations, definitely.
That is the dream. You can say published into 22 languages.
I know. I said to my agent, I want international bestseller in front, instead of just bestseller. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that they're not interested in reading history in Europe, and maybe this history, is it because it's too close? I'm fascinated by the taste for Second World War historical fiction these days. There's so many books written about it, and we sell so many books. There just is such a hunger for it, and I do wonder if it's just like we're just another generation away from it, where like it's not so close to tell stories about it. I don't know. I'm wondering about that. Do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I was just thinking about, about that recently, like why Ukraine wouldn't want it, when I've had so many Ukrainian people say, wow, I didn't even learn that in school. I didn't, well, they were until 1991 or 92, they were still part of Soviet Union, but, and a lot of them grew up speaking Russian, most of them still speak Russian first. And they speak Russian because they had to, right? Um, I don't know. I guess it is too close. They still feel like if you go to Germany, you can still feel in Germany the the reverberation of of Hitler. I still do. I still feel it. And Holocaust Memorial Day was it yesterday? They want to honor those that what happened there. And you know what? Putin. There's so many dictators, it's almost too close now, like it could be happen again, you know? There's so many dictators are off, kind of a little off or a lot off. And could it happen again? Like all it needs is apathy, that a dictator, an evil madman kind of thing who's can mesmerize the masses. So it's just they're in power. But I do feel that maybe it's just a little too close still, even though it's what 80 something years.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, even at the presidential inauguration, there were shades of that, right?
I know that fascist salute. I mean, that's what it was. And I heard today that in some museum in his picture, Elon Musk's picture was up on some museum in Berlin, and they took it down. So they know it was a fascist salute. They were distancing themselves from that too.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think of modern day as I read, especially the history, like over the European parts, because trust was so dissolved. Like they couldn't trust their spouse, they couldn't trust, and I just think trust is such an issue these days. You can see it kind of dissolving around us, and boy, that's scary. As I was reading your book, I couldn't help but think of what's going on right now.
Yeah, it has contemporary connections, definitely. Like we just shouldn't rest thinking it'll never happen again, right? Because there are like Trump himself is actually we don't know what he's going to do, right? The dictator, almost like a dictator type feeling. So yeah, no, it's very frightening times, but I think that the more we know about what happened, it's like, okay, oh yeah, this is how they got into people's heads or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And like you say, the trust wasn't there, and everyone was spying on everyone else. In a village, you never knew who was going to be a spy, and you didn't know if your best friend was going to turn you in. So yeah, it's
Or your
fear.
child, or your
It's an
child.
atmosphere of fear that the whole war just fed on, and it exploded into a huge sort of almost like a energy that people just couldn't escape. And I think that's kind of what's happening sometimes in like a friend of mine in the States said, we feel like we're imprisoned now. She used that word imprisoned, and I was like, oh my God, that's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
So I wanted to end the questions with a question about the future and your future. So would you be comfortable telling us what's next for you or what you're working on now?
Yeah,
I
well,
always
it's a
like to
different.
hear what people are reading now, what writers are reading, and what they're working on next, right? Because we always get them to talk about the thing as though it's contemporary. You finished this book a few years ago, so I want to hear about the now, Maya.
Well, I just that my editor has my next book. It's historical fiction set in 1983, but it's about three women's trip to Austria in 1983 and to investigate the paranormal disappearance of their mutual friend, and that which turns dangerous because they're stranded at a remote castle in Austria, and they learn through various paranormal ways that how very connected they are snared really with her eccentric family, their secretive past. So it also has a lot of contemporary connections with evil dictators and that kind of thing, and it's kind of hard to explain. So I am reading a lot of paranormal and watching a lot of paranormal supernatural stuff right now. I mean, it's not anything like fantasy, but yeah, it delves into definitely some paranormal stuff, and I'm sort of fascinated how other authors are doing that, how they're not going into fantasy, they're staying in historical fiction or in contemporary fiction, and they're really working in paranormal. And you see it on Netflix, you see it on Apple TV, a lot of supernatural stuff coming out and paranormal stuff, so about past lives and that kind of thing. So that intrigues me.
So interesting.
Well, but you're working on something, I'm sure, too.
Yeah, but it's not. Yeah, I'm not a subject area interest expert on the paranormal, Métis history, and World War II history. Like none of that. That's you. That's you.
Oh,
You're
well, I'm just one of those geeks who just loves to research. I just love to to find out more things about this time and these people and these women. That it's just you just have to know it, and I'm happier being with my characters than real people anyway. I mean, I like you guys. You're great, but and thank you so much, all the readers too, who picked up my book and read it and love great questions. But
So actually, I hate to backtrack, but I do have one additional reader question. They
okay.
emailed it. They asked in the chat again. So they asked why we talked a lot about Jeannie and Savka separately, but they're asking why did you have the alternating chapters? Because this particular reader ended up reading all of Jeannie's chapters and then going back and reading all of Savka's chapters.
I guess it would work that way. Yeah, you could work it that way because they're not like they're not together. So they're not sharing a timeline until the end. So the question again was, why did I do
Why
that?
did you decide to do the alternating chapters and like alternating sort of timelines, I guess?
Yeah, I've always liked alternating timelines, like two different timelines. My new book doesn't have that. It's all in one timeline. But I'm just fascinated by a more contemporary timeline, say, and then one that goes farther in the past and how they impact each other. And how can one person across the globe be connected to this person on a tiny island? They're how do they're connected? So it was really Marco's, hit that what happened in the hospital ward that night that connected them both. And I just thought, well, dual timeline works then for that. And it would seem natural for that book, whereas my new book, it's not. And in Song of Batosh, it wasn't that, I didn't do that either. But yeah, it was fun to do that back and forth, get into the 70s and then you're in the 40s, 50s. Yeah, I had
I
fun.
enjoyed that too. There's little clues in each, like you learn a little bit more and a little bit more, and you get closer and closer. There's a pleasure in kind of nudging forward, trying to figure out because you start from such a different place and time, as I said in the opening, and then how is this going to come together? And I just felt like I kept figuring it out, and there was little, I thought there were little clues.
Well, yeah, you can't just surprise the reader, right? So I had to have little clues in there about Taras. He could have been, Danik, he could be Taras. I couldn't, you can't just just pop it on, a reader. So, I did have little things, but sometimes you just don't see that until after you go, oh, wait a minute. Oh yeah, I guess she did kind of just talk. Like, I get that all the time. I'm trying to figure out the mystery. I'm a big Agatha Christie fan. So I always have to have a mystery in the book and a detective kind of trying to figure it out. And that's so much fun for me because I just love Agatha Christie stories. So.
Well,
And it's also like a long tradition of alternating voices in historical work and in novels in general. I mean, that's not new. You did many outstanding things, but you did not invent that technique.
But I did not, just invent that dual timeline. No, yeah, it definitely does. It's a readers some readers love it, others don't. Because then they end up liking one character more than the other, or one timeline more than the other, and they want to get back to that timeline. I think it gives the reader a little break too. Like, I'm not going to be just in that. Though I love books too that just stick in one, but I also love ones that are thrillers that are all over the place and have 6 or 8 points of view. I love all of it. So, yeah, it's really about the story and what serves the story, I think.
Well, thank you so much for sharing the evening with us, Maia. We really appreciate you being here. And people have been crying for historical fiction for months, and so everyone was very happy that we picked your book. And thank you, of course, to Ariel and Chris as well. Ariel will be back in May when we're going to be doing her book, Fungal. So I hope everyone will tune in for that. We are announced all the spring picks, and all that information is available on the book club website, which is winnipegfreepress.com/book-club. And that's it for us tonight. Thank you all for watching, and we will see you next month. Oh, next month's book is called The Lightning Bottles by Marissa Stapley.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one. I love that one.
Yeah, it's really good. Kind of different also for us in the club. I don't think we've really done a book similar to that yet. So I hope you all enjoy it, and we will see you for that next month. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Okay, we're good.
Okay.
Thank you
Thanks
so
very
much.
much.
It was
It was a
great.
great conversation.
Yeah.